Chapter 9. Caves. In early 1964, after 2 inspiring years serving Ajaan Kao, I resumed my wanderings in the wilds of the Northeast. I had my heart set on paying my respects to other highly acclaimed disciples of Ajaan Mun who resided in the area. Ajahns such as Ajaan Tate Desarungsi, Ajaan Fun Acharo, Ajaan Kumdi Pabaso, and Ajaan On Nyana Siri. Thus I embarked on a lengthy pilgrimage to pay homage to these great meditation masters in the forest monasteries where they lived. For 2 years I wandered by stages across the wind-swept and sparsely populated northeastern landscape, camping beneath shady trees and receiving food from the poor rice farmers who lived along my route. When bone-numbingly cold winds began blowing down from the north in December of 1965, I started hiking south toward the warmer weather that lingered on the Central Plains. I planned to eventually make my way back home to Chantaburi. News had reached me that my mother's chronic intestinal problems had gotten progressively worse while I was away, and I wanted to contribute to her recovery. Upon my return, I resumed my old position as abbot of Crystal Mountain Monastery. This time I was determined to bring my mother to the monastery so that she could spend the rainy season retreat period with me. When I noticed that her condition seemed somewhat improved, I took the opportunity to broach the subject with her. I went to her house to offer the invitation. When she voiced skepticism, I pleaded with her to join me at the monastery for 3 months of merit-making and meditation. She insisted she was too sick to spend 3 months away from home. I tried to bargain with her, suggesting first a 2-month stay, then a 1-month stay. But in the end, she agreed to stay at the monastery for only 10 days. From the very first day, I sensed my mother was annoyed with me. She resisted my overtures to help integrate her into the monastic routine. It appeared that she intended to stake out her independence from my chosen way of life. And she thought she had good reason. She quickly started to criticize what she felt to be my uncouth speech and behavior. After living alone and carefree in wilderness habitats for the past several years, I felt awkward playing the role of abbot once again and acting with the customary decorum expected of a monk of my seniority. This wild monkey that had swung from branch to branch through the jungle, beholden to no one and unconcerned with praise or censure, was now confronted by the norms of civilized society. Free from the dictates of socially acceptable rules and conventions, I had lived in the wilderness exactly as I chose, obedient to no necessities except for those imposed by wind and rain, and certainly not to those of the world of commonplace manners and customs. My robes were torn and frayed, lacking in color and freshness. My sunburned features, with chapped hands and thickly calloused feet, were an eyesore. Coarse, uncouth, and too direct, my speech was graceless and offensive. The monkey appeared rude. He had no table manners. In everyday conversations, I sometimes punctuated my speech with colorful expressions that some people considered to be vulgar. I tended to use crude and coarse language and inject swear words into discussions at the monastery. I might call someone a jackass or a damn fool in response to the circumstances at that moment. If I saw someone misbehaving, I might yell out, "You crazy idiot," or "Stop that shit," just to wake them up and get their full attention. Other expletives I uttered were perhaps too vulgar to mention here. Those robust responses were effective because all talking would stop after I spoke, and people would pay attention. They knew that the issue was important to me and that I meant business, and their reactions reflected that. I believe in being polite and encouraging when the circumstances warrant it, but sometimes vulgar speech provides a little extra grease on the wheels, not that my mother could have understood that reasoning. My mother soon began pleading with me to be more cultured and polite in my speech. Otherwise, people would criticize me for tarnishing my status as a celebrated senior monk. Being a gentle person, she was offended by vulgar language. Besides that, she felt embarrassed for me. She told me she knew I had a heart of gold on the inside, so why couldn't that good nature show on the outside too? Why on earth did I insist on talking like that? I was a monk. How come I didn't know the difference between what was appropriate and what was not? Frustrated, she occasionally wrung her hands and lamented that I tended to speak without any restraint. I tried to explain that I couldn't help it. It was instinctive, just part of the provincial dialect that I grew up speaking. True to my character, I became fluent in the salty language of the southeastern seashore fishermen. I'd always included a lot of common vulgarisms in my speech. Cursing playfully was common among the rowdy bunch I used to hang out with. We called each other every name in the book. But we just laughed about it. No one took offense. Among friends, they were words expressing a kind of affection. It was also common for village folk to keep up a foul-mouthed banter, especially when the older men addressed the younger ones. Respect for age and experience made it acceptable and even endearing. In terms of my age and my status as a monk, I felt a similar right and privilege. Most people were amused by my unsavory choice of words, although sometimes the monks and the women did profess embarrassment. My mother had long been an honored and well-respected member of Shantaburi society. With that status came a sense of pride and a feeling of dignity which she was determined to uphold despite her son's foul-mouthed behavior. She grudgingly tolerated me as mothers are wont to do with willful children. Although she disavowed my mannerisms, she never turned her back on me. I loved my mother dearly and didn't intend to cause her grief, but my natural instincts usually carried the day. I nevertheless made every effort to show gratitude to my mother as a way to pay back the lifetime of kindness she bestowed on me. On lunar observance days, a group of lay people, mostly women from the towns and cities across the region, congregated at the monastery's pavilion in the evening to hear me give a Dhamma talk. My Dhamma teaching theme never changed for those sessions. I would always stress the importance of body contemplation, though I'd usually start off with the virtues of the repetition of Buddho. Buddho is an exercise in ridding the mind of discursive thinking, so that it becomes clear, sharp, and attentive. There's no need to vocally intone the word or be concerned with trying to visualize anything. The objective is to eliminate mental distractions. It's not necessary to evoke a special attitude of devotion to the Buddha. Just focus on Bud, Do in quick succession. The faster the repetition, the less likely it is that thoughts will find the space to sneak in edgeways. Rapid-fire repetition of Buddho can generate enough mindfulness to rein in the mental restlessness that drives wandering thoughts, allowing them to gradually calm down and go quiet. Once the mind is sufficiently calm and quiet, conjure up a mental image of the physical body and start to meticulously dissect that image piece by piece, layer by layer. Taking the body to pieces is the most effective way to investigate it. I know this from personal experience. I always teach this type of body contemplation because I've seen how well it works. I told people to begin by dismembering the human body from head to toe. I first drew their attention to the head and went through its various parts. I instructed them to visualize the right eye and pull it out from its socket, then do the same with the left eye, and then place both on the pavilion floor. Imagine tearing away the right and left nostrils and throwing those on the floor. Rip off the ears, the cheeks, and the lips, then pull out all the teeth. Chuck that lot on the floor with the rest. Move on to the hands and feet and use the mental image of a sharp knife to chop off the fingers and toes, one digit at a time, and add that to the bloody heap in front of you. Using the same imaginary knife on the abdomen, peel back the skin and cut through the bands of muscle to expose the internal organs. The heart, liver, kidneys, and intestines, for example. Yank them out, one at a time in the mind's eye, then examine them for insight as you dice them into small pieces with the sharp blade. Now scatter the pieces across the floor and wonder, where in this disgusting mess am I? Where in it do I feel at home? Why do I carry this bloody burden around with me all the time? This is the gist of the Dhamma talk that I always gave on lunar observance days. I rarely deviated from that basic theme. The frequent use of this topic prompted my old friend Ajaan Fuang to confront me one day during a visit to the monastery. He accused me of teaching only one kind of meditation, regardless of who was in the audience. It was always chopping up body parts and scattering them front and center on the floor. No wonder no one wanted to listen to my Dhamma talks. There was only one style, one kind of talk, year after year. Why couldn't I tone it down a bit? Most people only wanted to hear something that made them relax and feel happy before going back to their family life. Women were particularly disgusted hearing about filthy body parts. It turned their stomachs. Why did I always insist on teaching women body contemplation? Ajaan Fuang recommended that I reserve this kind of intensive Dhamma investigation for my own practice instead. He felt it was inappropriate to introduce such practices to the general public. On this subject, Ajaan Fuang and I disagreed. But don't be misled. A disagreement between practicing monks on points of Dhamma is not an argument in the ordinary sense of the word. It is a difference of opinion from which both can learn and benefit. In fact, I heard complaints from many different people that my teachings were too harsh. Women were different, I was told. They came to listen to a smooth, eloquent discourse that would soothe their troubled minds. They weren't interested in attaining enlightenment. Why did I always insist on teaching women body contemplation? My answer to those people was, how could women be any different from men with respect to meditation practice? Men are human beings. Women are as well. We needn't doubt that for a moment. Men and women are not the same in appearance. We all know that. But there is not a whisker of difference between the sexes when it comes to their essential minds. So don't be deluded by superficial impressions. When we say, this is a man or this is a woman, those designations result from the arising of thought. In deep samadhi, where thought does not arise, attributes like man or woman do not exist. That should make it clear that no distinction exists between the conscious awareness of women and that of men. There is no reason, then, to doubt that women are fully capable of succeeding at all types of meditation. No grounds exist whatsoever for saying women can't become enlightened. If they really couldn't, what would I gain by going around lying about it to everyone? Women also have dirty parts, so it's only right that they should investigate those parts until they become disgusted and dismayed with physical existence, and thus motivated to relieve the mind of that heavy burden. I simply teach them the unvarnished truth. It's up to them to find the inner strength needed to face up to it. When I sat on the high seat in the pavilion teaching the people who came to meditate, some of them criticized me for scratching my crotch in public. They thought it very unbecoming of a monk to dig his fingernails into his private parts in full view of the assembly. They turned their heads away and cried foul. What was I supposed to do? The body itches when and where it chooses, and I scratch it to get some relief. It's as simple as that. If my ass itched, I'd scratch that too. Why should I feel awkward or embarrassed? So what if they're considered dirty places? The whole damn body is a dirty place that itches here and there following the causes and conditions of birth as a human being. I might as well be embarrassed about having arms and legs or hands and feet. When I fart or belch in public, it causes a stir. He's a monk. How dare he? It is as though these are somehow unorthodox behaviors. Farting is just a natural reflexive action of the bowels. Regardless of how it comes out, stomach gas makes a noise. This embarrassment occurs because people are so obsessed with bodies that they don't want to face the truth about them. In their minds, they divide out the shameful, dirty parts from the admirable, clean ones and pretend everything is fine, provided that everyone blindly follows the rules of social etiquette. Social customs certainly have their merits, but they mask a deeper reality about perceptions of the human body, which are characterized by a preference for beauty and attractiveness over ugliness and repugnance. These perceptions are deeply personal and conveniently go unquestioned to protect the preferred image. It is strange that people identify with and desire something as gross and repulsive as the human body. They can do so only by completely ignoring the realities of flesh and blood. I trained monks to practice the same method that I taught the lay people, though usually in more graphic detail. I always began by stressing the importance of disciplined behavior and focused attention. Without a strong foundation in discipline and powerful concentration, a monk's meditation was bound to falter when the practice intensified. Contemplating the body could resemble grabbing a tiger by the tail. Only those fully dedicated to the training had any real hope of taming the beast. On this topic, my talks often became animated. To hell with being content to create a comfortable cell in the oppressive prison of samsara. Break out of the confinement of attachment to the body and savor the freedom of never returning to the fetters of physical existence again. Free the spirit from the web of bodily attraction, refuse to settle for a life of bondage and incarceration. The monks needed to learn the monastic rules of conduct as well as bold meditation techniques. In terms of monastic discipline, I was strict and meticulous. I schooled every monk who came to me for guidance and reprimanded monks severely when they violated the rules, whether they respected me for it or not. At the very least, I intended to maintain a high standard within the monastery. Monks were expected to follow even the lesser, unwritten rules of conduct. For instance, if I noticed two monks walking together and chatting, I immediately scolded them for wasting time and sent them straight back to their huts to meditate. Idle chatter was typical behavior of laypeople, and it had no place in a practice monastery. Some monks were exemplary in carrying out their daily duties and responsibilities, only to later spend hours together fooling around. I chastised such monks when I caught them. I reckon I got better results meditating for the short time it took me to urinate than they did meditating all night. I taught the monks to be frugal with their requisites, and I led by example. Lay supporters worked hard, sacrificing their time and energy to provide monks with basic necessities. Forest monks were expected to keep those items in good condition, and when necessary, repair them to prolong their usefulness. They were expected to patch old robes that were torn or worn thin, and not just sit around idly waiting for lay folks to offer new robes to replace them. They mended holes in time-worn bowl bags, shoulder bags, and belts to keep them functional. Monks who acted responsibly with their requisites were content to make do with little. They knew how to live in humble circumstances and were happy to make use of second-hand items or maintain the usefulness of well-worn ones. Dhutanga monks take pride in mending their robes time and time again until the cloth looks like a patchwork of fabrics and stitches. I insisted that my monks learn how to skillfully sew their robes by hand, using the needles and thread included in their basic requisites. Hand sewing was a very useful skill for Dhutanga monks because it allowed them to easily mend cloth items when they were wandering and camping in the wilderness. I didn't want monks to be dependent solely on the monastery's sewing machines to make or repair their garments. I had learned from Ajaan Mun lessons in salvaging old cloth and other useful items that people threw away when they lost interest in them. For example, while walking on the country roads, I occasionally found an old, worn-out pair of pants or some other garment cast away on the side of the road. I thankfully picked up the obviously ownerless item from the ground and carried it back to the monastery where it could be washed and fashioned into small cloth requisites, patches for robes, or just foot rags. If I spied bent nails on the ground, I'd retrieve them, hammer them straight, and put them away for future use. A broken plastic bucket could be cut into pieces and, with a little innovation, shaped into a sheath to cover the blade of a machete or a hatchet. If I saw a damaged pillow or cushion cast in the drain in front of a house in the village when on alms round, I ordered a junior monk walking behind me to pick it up and carry it back with him. The poor monk would feel embarrassed clutching a damaged and soiled pillow along with his clean alms bowl. People must have thought he was crazy. When we returned to the monastery, I would have the monk take the stuffing from the cushion and spread it out in the sun to dry. He would then wash the cloth casing, patch it if necessary, and put the stuffing back inside. In the process, he would learn a valuable lesson. Don't be wasteful. Treasure the lowliest acquisitions. This is the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether one has plenty or just barely enough. Fine requisites themselves are not a true source of contentment and can easily become a source of discontent for a heart that lacks Dhamma principles to sustain it. Unsupported by Dhamma and left to its own desires, the heart will be unable to experience genuine happiness, even with a mountain of valuable possessions at its disposal. Regardless of whether a monk wears robes patched with rags or brand new robes, he must be satisfied with what he has and trust the power of the virtues he has developed to provide for the future. When craving leads the way, sought-after belongings end up being accumulated waste, which is useless for spiritual development. Ultimately, the monks who hoard these belongings turn their monasteries into wastelands of greed and desire. I wasn't going to allow that to happen at Crystal Mountain Monastery. When I moved back to Crystal Mountain Monastery in early 1966, I resolved to live there and assist my mother to the best of my ability for the remainder of her life. My mother was a very noble, kind, and respectable person. I loved her very much. I knew that she always had me on her mind. She had wanted me to be an active part of the family and trusted me to dedicate merit for her well-being after she passed away. Her death occurred on March 17, 1974, when she was 93 years old. I miss her to this day. Her cremation took place several days after her death. An open-air cremation pyre was built on a flat area in front of the main pavilion inside Crystal Mountain Monastery. I invited several highly respected disciples of Ajaan Mun to assist with the funeral arrangements and give Dhamma talks to the gathering of well-wishers attending the ceremony. After my mother's ashes had been gathered from the cremation site and dutifully distributed among members of the family, my filial responsibilities had been fulfilled. I was then released from further obligations and could roam freely again. After leaving Crystal Mountain Monastery, I trekked north through the country's central plains until I reached the Khao Yai mountain range that separates the central and northeastern regions of Thailand. I wandered Dutanga alone in the Dong Phaya Yen forest for a few months before making my way south to Bangkok. There I stayed at Asokarama Monastery, a monastery built by my mentor Ajaan Lee in the marshy Chao Phraya River estuary district on the outskirts of the city. It was a quiet and isolated location close to where the Chao Phraya River empties into the Gulf of Thailand. The main section of the monastery was built on high ground, but as more monks' residences were added over the years, construction began to stretch out into the swampy coastal tidewater area alongside the river. The huts there were built on stilts to protect them against rising water levels and were connected by elevated walkways which nearly flooded at high tide. The monks living at Asokarama Monastery were more urbane and studious than those I had been accustomed to teaching. Many of the senior monks were learned Pali scholars who showed little interest in meditation practice, and their students tended to follow their example. Undeterred by their apparent indifference, I gathered a group of young monks around me and instructed them in the basics of meditation. They were still required to spend their days pursuing academic studies, but in the evening, I brought them together for Dhamma discussions and meditation sessions.